Hi guys, and welcome back to the second in this series of hints and tips for plastic model makers. My name is Steve and I'm on an adventure. My adventure is to do the best possible job I can of building this kit. Ital Ares 1/32 scale F104C Starfighter. It's not a bad kit, it seems to go together quite well, or at least it has so far. But it's also a kit that isn't up to the standards of, say, for example, a Tamiya kit would be. So there's lots we can do to improve it. And in places, that's a kind of optional extra. In other places, for me at least, that's a real necessity. It's something that I feel like I have to do. So as I said, this is the second part in a series of videos. If you want to see the first one, have a look at a short video I made on how to build straps and harnesses. That was for the cockpit. What I'm doing now is moving on to the wheelbase, the main landing gear area. And I'm going to show some of the techniques that I'm using for improving the detail in there. That's the second part of the journey. I hope you'll join me for it. If you've got anything you'd like to share, so if you've got your own approaches, you want to give me your own hints and tips, for example, or share that with folks who might be watching, then please do the traditional thing. Leave those in the comments just below. It would be great to hear from you. So here we go with part two. Next up, I'm going to show you some of the components that I'm using, and we'll take a look at my approach and general kind of philosophy when it comes to scratch building. So these are the basic components of the main landing gear area. This part is the ceiling. It actually fits that way up into the underbelly of the aircraft. You've got two bulkheads that fit at either end and a strut that runs down the middle. And then the actual legs themselves. Obviously there are some wheels that fit on the end of here, but I'm not going to fit those until later. The parts are here and there available and all cleaned up because when I'm scratch building something, I like to be able to see the basic building blocks, you know, the big parts that the scratch building is going to move around. So for example, with these components, I can start to fit them together and we can get an idea of this area, for example, just here. You know, where the bulkhead joins to the ceiling, you can start to think, well, okay, the tubes are going to have to go from here, along here, and up into here. So it really helps picture things in my head. And that's the general approach I'm taking when I'm scratch building things. I kind of have a plan. I don't write it out, but I have a plan in my head. And the plan for this is to first of all make some improvements to the floor. This component came with some pre-molded hosing and tubing on it. You can see that actually. I took a photo of it and posted it on the Aeroscale blog that I'm running alongside these videos. It was really pretty crude. It would have been okay. It's not going to show that well, but because I'm on this adventure of trying to do the best job I can with this kit, it wasn't good enough for me at this point. So I've taken all the basic moulding off. I used sanding sponges, sanding sticks, and a modeller's file to do that. A modeller's chisel to do that. And we're left with the basic floor area. And then these other components I've been taking apart and cleaning up. It was actually in the process of cleaning up these legs that I realised that we really were going to have to do some scratch building to make this as good as it could be. There was a terrible seam line that ran right down the middle here. You can't see it anymore because I've actually taken it off. And there's some really soft moulding in these areas on these shock absorbers. And generally the whole thing could just be improved. It could be made to look sharper and made to look like something that's separate components rather than all one big component. So that's the plan, to improve the legs, to improve everything I possibly can. I've started a little bit of work already. So on this bulkhead, for example, you can see these holes. They really weren't provided in the original kit. When you look at reference photos, there's a sort of blanking plate behind the holes and the hoses and tubes go through them. So I simply put some plastic card there. Easy peasy. Just cut out some strips of plastic card and glued those over. The holes were created by using a drill and then sanding them down a little bit just to make sure the edges were nice and smooth. So I've already made a start, as you can see. But the next thing I'm going to do is show you how I got some of the riveting effect on this component. It might be, oh, you can just see it. There you go. You see where the light's highlighting it? You can start to see some of the riveting. And I'm going to show you what I did to achieve that. So let's go and have a look at some riveting. Step one is really pretty simple. What I do is on the actual plastic part itself, I sketch out the main lines where the rivets are going to go. You might be able to see, for example, here, there's some pencil lines. I don't do these exactly, I'm not measuring it with the ruler, I'm just giving myself an idea of where the main lines are. Because what I'm going to do is use some Dymo tape to guide a riveting tool, and then once there's some small dents in place, I'm going to enhance them with another tool. When I talk about Dymo tape, you probably know exactly what I mean, but let me just show you. I mean this stuff. So what I do is I lay a line of that along where the rivets need to go. I use a riveting tool to make the initial indentations, and then, as I said, I improve on those. So let's have a look at how that goes. Right, here's a piece of Dymo tape cut off. It's actually much too wide for the purposes that I need it for, and as a kind of economy measure, you can also cut it into smaller strips. So that's what I do to start with. I just make some smaller strips of this stuff. Just like this. I'm just going to cut down there. Missed a bit. There. Now that's actually going to be a lot more suitable for getting into this area. And as I said, we've still got this bit to work with later. One of the tricky things with Dymo tape is actually getting the back off. So rather than make you watch while I struggle with it, I'm going to stop and then start up again once I've actually got the back of this stuff off. Right, here we go. I actually got a knife between the tape itself and the backing, so I can get my hands in there, and there we go. Now we've got a nice strong and sticky piece of tape. So next thing, I'm just going to lay it along the line where I want the rivets to go. So for example, I'm going to choose this line here. Just stick it right along like that. Whoops. Trying to make sure it actually sticks. Right, there we go. Got it. So now that tape, and you've probably seen other guys do this on other videos as well, this is a fairly standard technique. That tape is now going to act as a line for the riveting tool. And the riveting tool I'm using is one of these beautiful things, Rosie the Riveter. This is the 1/48th scale riveting wheel on the end here. I'm using this one, the 1/32nd scale riveting wheel. So it's simple now. We just take the riveter and we butt it up against the edge here, and we take it along the line. Now what that process gives us is a very subtle line of rivets. I don't know if you can even see them just down here. For me in 1/32nd scale this is too subtle. I always worry that these are going to get filled up with paint, and that by the time I come to put a wash on them, that they're really not going to show. So the next thing I do is I enhance these. And to enhance them, I use one of these things. This is actually a tool that's used for modelling clay, but you can see it's got a nice sharp point on there. It's not needle sharp, you know, it doesn't kind of penetrate skin because that would be too sharp. But what this does when we use it on this particular component is it enhances the little holes that are already there. So what I do is I take this, I find one of the little holes, and they act as a nice guide, and I just centre it, push it in, and do that with each one. Now what I'm getting is a nice deep hole, and because I'm pushing the needle into plastic, there's a crater being created around the edge, which gives a slight raised rivet effect. Let me see if that's actually visible on the camera. I don't know if it is. It might be too subtle. It's just here. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see that, but you get the general idea, right? I'm using the indentations made by Rosie the Riveter to guide where the end of this needle goes. That way I'm making sure I get a nice straight line, and I'm getting a nice even gap between each rivet. I've tried to do this by hand in the past, and it's nightmarish. It's just almost impossible to get things neat and evenly spaced. So this technique, it's a bit slow and laborious. You know, you probably want some Zen music on in the background. This technique is a great way of actually making sure that your rivets are equidistant and also they come out in a nice straight line as well, like these ones are. Well, I've just reviewed things so far, and there's a couple of things I forgot to mention that I just want to go into. The first thing is when I was using this tool, I forgot to say that I wasn't pressing too hard. If the plastic's thin and you really push into it with this, then there's a real risk that you'll actually penetrate the plastic, and instead of a dent, you'll end up with a hole. It nearly happened to me because the thickness of the plastic on that component I was working on varied. The first part was thick and I could put a lot of pressure on. The second part was quite thin, and I only realised it when I first pushed in and went, uh-oh, that's gone a bit further than I thought. So check the other side to see how thick the plastic is. The second thing is when we're scratch building, I don't know about you, but I kind of set the standard that the factory sets. In other words, I want something to look as neat as the factory can make it and as uniform as a factory can make it. And the chances of that happening when you're using your hands and your eyes instead of using machinery are pretty slim. So although I try as hard as I can to get things uniform and neat, there's a bit of me that accepts every once in a while that it's not going to be quite like a factory finish. There's going to be a little bit of imperfection. When you're focusing on a component and a part, I tend to see only that tiny little bit. You're talking about something this big. And I forget that when it's all put together, it's going to be a great big plane, and the area that I'm working on is just a small part of that. Now, that's not to say it's not important to try and get it right and as good as you can, but at the same time, I'm trying to balance that desire with the kind of need to say, okay, well, look, I'm an imperfect human being. Things aren't always going to go exactly as I want to. So if I get something that's good and I'm happy with it, then I'll settle with it. If I'm not happy with it, I tend to put something aside and I'll come back to it an hour or two later, or even the next day and review it. And if it still doesn't look good, then I would start again. So, for example, with the riveting I've just been doing, if I really didn't like something, if the lines were wonky, or if I'd managed to use this thing and push it right through, I would have filled it and started it again. There are some little imperfections, and you might see them in the photos I'm going to post at the final thing at the end of this video. But for me, that's okay. I'm going to accept that simply because, as I said earlier, we're humans, we're fallible, not everything goes perfectly. And for this particular component as well, ultimately, it's going to be very hard to see unless someone picks up the kit and looks underneath, which I don't know about you, but I kind of discourage because people who don't know about models tend to break stuff because they don't know they're delicate. It's actually going to be hidden. So I just wanted to end on that slightly kind of philosophical note that might help a bit as well, because I think sometimes as models, well, I don't know about you, but I can drive myself nuts looking for perfection. But, sometimes good is good enough. So anyway, I hope that's helped. Have a look at the shots at the end. I seem to be developing a style now where I kind of talk and then show the shots. And they'll probably show you more than you can see in the film itself. So again, I hope this has been useful. Check out the blog on Aeroscale if you want some more detail and some more background. And in the meantime, if you're watching this over the Christmas holidays, I hope you're having a great time with lots of fun and love in your life. And I'll see you again for the next part. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.